He saw the hand connect with a sharp crack, and everything else in that moment seemed to freeze in time, because Chuck Norris had been helping a group of volunteers set up tables for a weekend community festival when he heard the startled cry of a teenager and the angry shout of a man who radiated impatience. So Chuck turned instantly and witnessed a scene that ignited every protective instinct inside him. The boy who had been hit stumbled backward, eyes wide with shock, his features carrying the distinct traits of Down syndrome, and the man responsible was glaring with a twisted expression that revealed no remorse. Chuck felt a pulse of anger flare through him, but he forced himself to remain calm for the sake of the frightened teen whose only offense had been bumping into someone while retrieving some supplies for the event. There was a moment of stunned silence as the man spat insults and threatened to do worse if the boy did not watch where he was going. Then he raised his hand again as if daring the teen to get near him. But Chuck stepped in fast and planted himself firmly between that hateful man and the stunned youngster, telling him in a steady voice to back away now. The teen's eyes brimmed with tears and he trembled, trying to apologize even though he had done nothing to warrant such aggression. Chuck kept a protective arm in front of the teen, gaze unwavering as he locked on the man who had dared to lash out at someone unable to defend himself. The aggressor sneered, demanding that Chuck move aside, calling the teen slurs that froze the blood of a few onlookers who were beginning to gather at the commotion, but Chuck refused to budge. His voice was calm, but his words burned with the clarity of absolute conviction. He told the man that striking a vulnerable person was a line no decent human ever crossed, that cruelty towards someone with a disability was a sickening act, and that he would not allow another blow to land on this teen or anyone else. The man tried to bluster his way past Chuck, but Chuck was too fast, intercepting him with a light push that was gentle enough not to injure yet firm enough to send the message that the aggressor was not getting through. A small crowd began to form, confused by the sudden tension at what should have been a peaceful community gathering, especially since Chuck had originally come just to help with the local fundraiser. Now everyone realized something ugly had taken place, because the teen clutched the edge of a table, one cheek reddened where he had been slapped, eyes rimmed with tears that spoke of betrayal and confusion. Chuck felt the sting of seeing such an innocent individual attacked for no reason. He addressed the bystanders, urging someone to assist the teen while Chuck confronted this aggressor. Some volunteers moved in to comfort the teen, gently guiding him to a seat, and the boy's lips quivered as he tried to explain that he had only been carrying some brochures for the festival when he accidentally bumped the man's shoulder. Chuck spoke quietly with the teen for a second, telling him to breathe easy, telling him he was not at fault, telling him to focus on the kindness around him because the rest of them would handle this cruel outburst. The man rolled his eyes and shouted again, claiming that people with disabilities should not be roaming around if they could not see where they were going, and Chuck whipped around, protective fury flaring as he pointed out that everyone here had a right to be part of the event. The aggressor bared his teeth in anger, taking a step forward with clenched fists, but Chuck had no intention of letting him proceed. Chuck told him to think carefully before doing anything he would regret, explaining that the moment he raised his hand, he had crossed a line that demanded accountability. A hush settled on the crowd. Those who recognized Chuck realized the aggressor had just run into the worst possible scenario for a person looking to bully someone. Others who had not realized who Chuck was simply saw a man standing with unwavering resolve to protect a teenage boy in need. The aggressor hesitated, a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes, but his anger roiled under the surface, so he started hurling insults again. Chuck gave him a final warning, stating clearly that harming someone with a disability was an offense that went beyond mere unkindness. He promised the man that if he tried to strike again, Chuck would stop him with no hesitation. The aggressor sneered but did not advance, perhaps sensing that Chuck was not bluffing. A trickle of volunteers approached from various directions, wanting to know what was happening. Some recognized the teen, named Travis, who often helped out at local events by handing out flyers and greeting people, always with a big smile and a sweet nature that warmed hearts. The thought that someone had slapped him for a minor mishap made them recoil in disbelief. Another volunteer quickly flagged down a local officer who happened to be on duty near the festival site, urging him to come address the altercation. Meanwhile, Chuck turned his focus fully on the teen, crouching so he could look him in the eye. He asked if Travis was hurt, if he needed medical attention, but Travis shook his head, eyes brimming with tears, repeating that he was sorry for bumping into the man. Chuck told him that no apology was necessary, that accidents happen, and that no one should respond with violence. Travis's lip quivered as he asked in a trembling voice if he did something really bad to deserve that slap, and Chuck placed a gentle hand on his shoulder, telling him no, that it was not his fault, that sometimes cruel people lash out in ways that make no sense. Chuck promised that Travis was surrounded by friends who cared about him. The aggressor, hearing Chuck's words of comfort, barked that Travis needed to learn to move out of the way, that people like him should be kept somewhere else. But Chuck turned his head slowly, eyes cold, telling the man that was enough, telling him not to utter another hateful word. The man opened his mouth as if to snap back, but the uniformed officer arrived, stepping between them. Chuck explained in measured terms what had transpired, how the teen had been hit without provocation. Several witnesses chimed in, confirming the story. The man tried to spin a tale about how the kid had run into him, knocking things out of his hands, but the watchers shook their heads, pointing out that the man had slapped the boy unprovoked. The officer asked the man to step aside, radioing for possible backup if needed. Chuck stayed near Travis, continuing to reassure him that everything was going to be all right. The teen's tears started to slow, replaced by a shaky gratitude directed at Chuck for intervening. Chuck, in a voice low enough for only Travis to hear, told him that no one deserved what had happened, that the rest of the volunteers would never allow such cruelty to stand. Travis nodded, wiping his cheeks. The officer asked the man for identification, told him that assaulting someone, especially a minor, was a serious offense. The man sputtered with outrage, trying to argue that it was just a slap, that no real harm had been done. Chuck felt anger bubble up again, but he tamped it down, letting the officer handle the official procedure. Meanwhile, a small circle of volunteers formed around Travis to provide comfort, telling him jokes, trying to lighten the tension that hung in the air. Chuck stood guard, meeting the gazes of those who had just witnessed a shocking act of violence. The officer took witness statements, asked Chuck for details, asked if the teen's parents were on site, because protocol demanded contacting them. A friend of the family volunteered to call Travis's mother, who was on her way. The aggressor watched all this with sullen eyes, as if he could not believe the crowd sided with the teen. Chuck recognized the signs of a bitter man who refused to admit fault, but Chuck also knew that real consequences awaited him now. He stepped aside to let the officer gather information, and a paramedic who was part of the festival staff came forward to check Travis for any sign of physical harm. The teen's cheek was red but not badly bruised, though the emotional damage had clearly been done. Chuck tried to lighten the teen's spirits by reminding him about all the helpful things he had done for the event, pointing out that the day had begun with him making everyone smile with his exuberant greeting. Travis nodded, still shaken but beginning to breathe more easily. He asked Chuck quietly if Chuck was mad at him for running into that man, but Chuck assured him that accidents happen to everyone. Another volunteer added that she tripped and spilled lemonade on someone earlier, but no one slapped her over it. The crowd nodded in agreement, letting Travis know he was not the one in the wrong. The officer eventually escorted the aggressor off to the side, explaining that charges could be filed, and the man started shouting that it was all overblown. Chuck monitored from a distance, arms folded, making sure the man did not try anything else. The rest of the group kept a protective space around Travis, continuing to show him kindness. Chuck believed that the best remedy for cruelty was to demonstrate compassion that left no question about whose side the community was on. Travis's mother arrived, breathless with concern, having heard fragments of the story over the phone. She knelt by her son, checking his cheek with trembling fingers, tears of rage and worry mixing in her eyes. Travis comforted her, telling her he was okay because Chuck had stepped in, and he glanced in Chuck's direction with a small hint of a smile. Chuck walked over to reassure her that the volunteers and the officer had handled the situation, that the man who struck Travis would face consequences for his unprovoked assault. She thanked Chuck repeatedly, voice catching in her throat, acknowledging that her son sometimes moves quickly without realizing how close he is to other people, but no one has the right to use violence against him. Chuck nodded, telling her that her son did nothing wrong, telling her that real blame lies with those who let impatience and malice spill over into cruelty. Travis's mother embraced her son, stroking his hair, while the officer came over to discuss filing a report. Travis clung to his mother's hand, fear still flickering in his eyes, but Chuck assured him that everything was being done to keep him safe. Word spread quickly around the festival, leading more people to approach Travis with gentle words and supportive gestures. Chuck told the volunteers that it might be best to give the teen some space, though, because the attention could overwhelm him. A teacher who recognized Travis offered a seat under a shade canopy where he could rest and calm down without the entire crowd staring. Chuck hovered nearby, always keeping an eye on the subdued hush that followed such an ugly confrontation. Soon, the officer informed them that the man who had slapped Travis was likely to be charged with assault, or at the very least cited for disorderly conduct, depending on how the family wanted to pursue it. Travis's mother, still on edge, glanced at Chuck for reassurance. Chuck encouraged her to do what felt right, reminding her that allowing the man to walk away scot-free might embolden him to harm someone else. She nodded, face set, telling the officer she wanted to press charges for striking her child. Travis looked at Chuck with a mix of relief and lingering fear, so Chuck sat down beside him, ignoring the adrenaline still coursing through his own system. He told the teen that sometimes bad things happen out of nowhere, but the rest of the community would rally around him. He said that there was nothing to be ashamed of, that no one deserved to be slapped, especially not someone who was just trying to help at a community event. Travis sniffled and asked if Chuck could still do the martial arts demonstration he had come to do, because Travis had been excited to see it. Chuck almost smiled at the sweet request, nodding that of course he would, but only if Travis wanted to be there to watch. Travis brightened a little, admitting that he was worried about getting close to crowds again. Chuck reminded him that one cruel man did not represent everyone, and that plenty of kind people were around, people who would never stand by and let something like that happen again. Travis listened, shoulders slowly losing the tension that had gripped them since he had been struck. Meanwhile, the aggressor was being escorted off the premises by the officer, ranting about how he was the one disrespected. Chuck watched him go, arms still folded, an unmistakable resolve in his eyes. The man cast a last baleful look at Travis, but Chuck stepped forward, meeting his gaze, making it clear that nothing further would be tolerated. The man finally turned away, disappearing beyond the boundary of the festival. Once it was all settled, Chuck refocused on ensuring Travis's comfort, inviting him to help with some simpler tasks that did not require too much interaction with strangers. Travis hesitated, but Chuck encouraged him gently, explaining that staying engaged might help him feel normal again, reminding him that one hateful act should not rob him of his enthusiasm. Travis tentatively agreed, so he followed Chuck around, handing out small cups of water to volunteers and participants, receiving warm smiles of gratitude. The supportive atmosphere helped wash away some of the bitterness. Chuck made sure to stop by the local special needs booth, a place that offered resources and activities for kids and adults with disabilities. He introduced Travis to a couple of other individuals who had Down syndrome or other conditions, letting Travis see that he was not alone, letting him see that acceptance was a guiding principle for the festival. A coordinator at the booth recognized Travis, praising him for always bringing positivity to events. Travis blushed with modest pride, clearly moved by the kindness. Chuck recognized that a single moment of brutality can shatter a person's sense of safety, but unwavering solidarity can help rebuild that sense of belonging. Therefore, Chuck gently guided Travis through the rest of the day, making sure any stares from onlookers were diffused by Chuck's calm presence. He cracked a few jokes with Travis, describing silly mishaps he had experienced earlier in life, reminding the teen that everyone bumps into someone at some point. The tension began to dissipate, replaced by a cautious hope that the rest of the event would proceed peacefully. Chuck realized that defending someone is not just about stopping the immediate danger, it is also about lifting them up afterward, ensuring they do not fall prey to shame. By the time Chuck was ready for the brief demonstration he had promised the organizers, Travis was feeling calmer. Chuck asked if Travis wanted to sit in the front row, and the teen nodded, still a little unsure but wanting to show bravery. Chuck performed a short routine that highlighted discipline and control, explaining to the watchers that true martial arts skill was about respect, protection, and empathy, not about intimidation or aggression. He glanced at Travis during the demonstration, occasionally making eye contact to let him know that real strength is measured by how it defends the vulnerable, not how it oppresses them. Afterward, Chuck invited a few volunteers to come up and try a basic move, stressing that martial arts teaches self-confidence in handling conflict. Travis shyly stood, and Chuck gently guided him through a simple block, telling him that if someone tries to harm him, it is not wrong to protect himself. Travis's eyes sparkled a bit, understanding that he was not powerless, that there were ways to stand his ground. A round of applause followed, and Chuck spotted Travis's mother in the crowd, tears in her eyes again, but this time tears of gratitude. The festival wound down, but the impact of that ugly incident lingered in everyone's hearts. People approached Chuck to thank him for stepping in, acknowledging that he had prevented a serious escalation. Chuck humbly responded that anyone with decency would have done the same. Yet he knew that not everyone reacts quickly enough when faced with unexpected cruelty. He hoped that seeing the confrontation might inspire some bystanders to be braver in protecting individuals with disabilities who face discrimination or abuse. Travis lingered near Chuck, glancing up with admiration as they closed down booths and returned borrowed equipment. Chuck asked if Travis wanted to help gather leftover flyers, because earlier that was what he had been doing before everything went wrong. Travis nodded with a small grin, collecting the scattered pamphlets with a new sense of confidence. Chuck knelt down and told him that no one could ever take away his right to be here, to enjoy community events, or to walk through life with his head held high. Travis nodded, hugging the flyers to his chest, looking relieved that the day had not ended in darkness. Chuck then ensured the officer gave Travis's mother the necessary contact information, so she could follow through with the assault charges. He urged her not to feel guilty about seeking justice, telling her that ignoring the attack would only enable the aggressor to strike again. She nodded, eyes reflecting the same protective love Chuck had shown for her boy. As the sun started to set, Chuck walked Travis and his mother to their car, making sure they felt safe. Travis surprised Chuck by asking if they could stay for the small fireworks display planned later that night. Chuck looked to the mother for her approval, and she hesitated, worried about how Travis might feel among the crowd. Travis insisted he wanted to stay, that he did not want fear to rule him. Chuck admired that resilience, so they found a spot on the lawn, where the evening's final entertainment would take place. People greeted Travis warmly, offering supportive smiles. Chuck quietly sat with them, reflecting on how swiftly a normal day could turn into a moment of crisis, and how vital it was that individuals stood up against injustice whenever it arose. When the first fireworks soared into the sky, blazing in brilliant colors, Travis let out a small cheer, momentarily forgetting the earlier trauma. Chuck smiled, silently grateful that the teen could still find excitement in the simplest joys. Chuck promised himself that he would stay until they were ready to leave, remaining vigilant in case anything else happened. But no further trouble came. Instead, Chuck sensed an undercurrent of renewed kindness ripple through the crowd, as though everyone recognized the importance of banding together for those who might be vulnerable. When the show ended, Travis jumped up, clapping. Chuck saw that the fear had receded, replaced by a quiet confidence. The teen turned to Chuck and said thank you in a voice that was still small but filled with sincerity. Chuck shook his hand, telling him there was nothing to thank him for, that standing up for each other was simply the right thing to do. Travis nodded, a spark of understanding in his eyes. His mother placed a hand on Chuck's arm, expression deeply grateful, explaining that her son's world could have been shattered by that man's cruelty, but Chuck's swift intervention showed him he was not alone. Chuck just said she was an amazing mother to raise such a kind kid. She smiled through her tears, gently guiding Travis back to their vehicle. Chuck watched them go, the teen looking back once or twice as if to confirm Chuck was still there, still keeping watch. When they finally drove off, Chuck felt a surge of relief. He knew that while he could not prevent every act of cruelty in the world, He had sent a message today that no one should ever slap a disabled teenager without facing immediate consequences. As the festival wrapped up, Chuck helped with final cleanup, his mind returning to the shock on Travis's face when he was first struck. Chuck silently promised to remain vigilant wherever he went, because if anyone else dared to raise a hand against an innocent person, Chuck would be there again, stepping in with unwavering resolve. The night air carried the fading smell of popcorn and sizzling burgers, the remains of a day that had been both joyous and painful. Chuck gazed at the darkening sky, thankful for the people who had rallied to support Travis. He thought about how small actions and words can either destroy or uplift, and how vital it was to choose compassion. He left the site, driving under the glow of streetlights, replaying the events in his mind. The sting of seeing a cruel hand strike that teen would not fade soon, but at least Travis understood he was valued, that the rest of the community saw him as a friend, not an inconvenience. Chuck believed that any cruelty, no matter how brief, must be met with a powerful stand for humanity. Therefore he drove onward, certain that if life placed him in front of another innocent person who needed defending, he would not hesitate. Watch the next Chuck Norris stories on our channel, because his adventures never end and neither does his determination to shield the vulnerable in moments of peril.